Hi, I'm Leah Wheatholter, CEO and founder of Workman Forensics in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and this is the Data Sleuth Podcast. As part of this series, Workman Forensics and our podcast guests are providing free resources and tools with each episode to help you with your practice, whether you're just starting out or you're wanting to take your practice to the next level. Make sure to listen to the end of the episode to find out how to download. Lastly, during the last episode of the season, we're going to answer all of your questions. So if you have any questions about the business of forensic accounting, send them to me via YouTube, LinkedIn, or by emailing us at podcast@workmanforensics.com. In this episode, I talk with Dan Ramey about how to sell to clients, specifically attorneys. In this episode, Dan and I discuss the types of services that fall under forensic accounting, how to sell forensic accounting services to attorneys, how to avoid the salesy feeling by just being yourself and asking questions. People hire people they like and want to work with. And then we also briefly touch on considerations when starting a forensic accounting practice as either a solo practitioner or within a public accounting or consulting firm. Dan Ramey is the founder and president of Houston Financial Forensics, LLC, and Dan T. Ramey, CPA, LLC. His professional certifications include, and it's quite the list, CPA, CFF, CITP, ABV, CFE, CVA, CIA, CRMA, CISA, and CMA. That's a lot. He is a past president of the Houston Chapter of the Institute of Internal Auditors and formerly a member of the Board of Governors. Dan previously served as chairman of the Houston CPA Society's Forensic and Valuation Committee and served 2 terms as treasurer of the Houston Chapter of InfraGard. Dan is also an adjunct professor at Baylor University and University of Houston, where he teaches courses in the graduate level of the Masters of Accountancy programs. Dan graduated from Baylor University with a degree in accounting and from Houston Christian University with an executive MBA. I'm so excited to have Dan on the podcast today, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. Well, hi, Dan. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Leah. It's an honor to be here with you.
So excited. I'm surprised it's taken us like this long to have this conversation.
It's taken a while, but we're here.
Um, yeah, we're here. You are another individual that we've become friends through LinkedIn. We met over
Absolutely.
LinkedIn.
And at conferences. We went to Joe's conference the first
Yes.
year.
Yes, and Joe's conference. Exactly. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to jump into the topic today because we're
Okay.
going to be talking about selling services to attorneys. And of course, if we touch on other types of clients, that's fine too. But I want to first start with what services do you consider forensic accounting?
So forensic accounting, it's more broad than what I do. So there's certain things I will not do. Like I have entertained, but I have yet to take on a family law case. Okay.
Okay.
So I know you do, but I want one side, at least one side happy with me. And I feel like in those cases, neither side is happy with the forensic person. So I'm like, I want out of that one. I
You are not wrong.
I have talked to some, but it's really got to be in my wheelhouse on what I'm looking for. If there's a fraud going on within a corporation, that falls more in line if it were family law. So I'm pretty particular with that, but mainly fraud investigations. I do some cyber risk assessment. I'm not the technical guy that can go in and dig through everything, but I can fill out an IC3 form and talk to the client and see where things have gone and look under the covers a little bit. I do a lot of litigation support. So that's cases, when you think of forensics, that's a legal issue somewhere. There's a legal matter in there. So in some form or fashion, it's a claim, it's a dispute, whatever it may be, kind of falls under forensics. Business interruption. And, when you've got hurricanes and tornadoes down in this area, that's, something that pops up a lot. Financial
And
statement fraud is another one. Yes,
yeah, I was just going to say on that business interruption, quantifying the losses due to that business
correct.
interruption, like those damages.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
sometimes that
Okay.
can get very picky. And of course, the client wants A and insurance offers B, and, you work through that and the attorneys and stuff. Valuation is another one. Now, I've got valuation training and certifications, but keeping up the databases, and that is a very active field of what gets applied and its tax, and there's methodologies involved. And so I know it, I can talk it, I teach it at school, but I just don't do it anymore. Keeping up the databases was way too expensive for the volume that I had. And there are people out there that do valuation that are literally rock stars in this. So I'm going to leave that one to them. And then economic damages around contracts or disputes also I fall into. And then the area that I've been working in the last couple of years is also bankruptcy. And so
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of fraud going back and forth in bankruptcy, and that's actually one of my bigger cases right now is a bankruptcy case. And the defendants decided it was they wanted to potentially we're making assumptions at this point, move some money after the bankruptcy judge told them not to. And the investor, who is the plaintiff, is challenging that. So that's what we're
Yeah.
working on. So that's kind of the area of forensics to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think your work and my work, we overlap. We kind of fall more into that, like, fraud space for sure, maybe some damages. I think the damages I end up calculating are really more related to there was a fraud,
Right.
and so then the resulting damages of that, but, yeah, I stay out of that business valuation space. I'm gonna have a business valuation guest on, but, I stay out of that space because 'cause you're right. That's just I think it's just a different skill set and has its own set of, like you said, rules,
So it
methodologies,
does.
and
And
you gotta know that stuff.
so I love the modeling. I love to sit there, learn the business, calculate everything. But I will be very honest, I hate writing the reports. And like a minimum report for valuation is about 100 to 120 pages. I'm
Yeah,
out. Like that just doesn't
yeah,
fit. I can do a fraud investigation in 5 or 10, whatever we need that's very factual, but the valuation stuff, I'm glad I know it. If I could just do the learning and the modeling, I'd be good. But unfortunately, that's half of it. So I'm out.
right. Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious, how did you end up working in this forensic accounting space?
So it's been a long ride to get here. Started out in internal audit long time ago, and within our internal audit group at this company, we were broken into financial statement, internal audit, and I'm not a strong FASB person. I'm not going to argue. I do not know pronouncements. I can still do debits and credits, but I have to look sometimes. I do have cheat sheets
Right.
with T accounts that I work through. Okay, um,
Hey,
but
that's
I
fair. Me too.
but I did operational IT and all of our fraud there. And I got into that and absolutely loved it. This was about the same time that ACFE was created. I joined that, got my CFE, got my CIA. So my background to here has been a lot of internal controls, running professional service firms, and doing forensics in some form or fashion, whether it's valuation or investigations, whatever it may be. And so one of the things I learned this from a client, I went out to meet with them. It was a board member, and he said, "You are the most unique person that we know of, and you can do the two things that we need. You do the fraud investigation and you can do the remediation on the controls." He said,
Mhm.
"We know people who can do the investigation. We know people who can do the internal controls, but you're the only one we have found." And they searched to do both with one engagement. And I was like,
Mhm.
"Thank you." And that kind of resonated with me. And I've used that as the internal audit, strong controls with accounting, running accounting shops, et cetera, and then also being able to do the fraud investigation. So I've just kind of married those together. To me, it's okay to do the fraud investigation, but if you don't fix the problem, they're going to call you back in a year. And so
Right.
help them fix the problem
Right.
with it. So that's how
Yeah.
I get there.
I love that. So that's really interesting that that's your story. This last week, I spoke at the Dallas IIA fraud summit.
Okay.
And as I was preparing for this and just thinking about the internal auditors I've met, or people in the internal audit space, I just kind of started noticing, I think internal audit is going to end up owning fraud investigations for corporations, right? And um, when I think it's kind of on the rise. So the CEO for the IAA was giving the state of the profession, and he said, I internal audit is going to be owning this fraud space. And then I was a keynote speaker to talk about like how do you take your internal audit findings and turn that into an investigation that can be prosecuted. That's kind of my like you take what you found
Right.
and then let's package it, investigate it, use best evidence, and then sell it to your prosecutors or even in a civil suit. So I think that what you're describing is just going to keep growing, like
Yeah.
what your experience has been. I think
Well,
this
and
is the
and I
trend.
think the key is that internal auditors understand controls. And in most of the cases, at least on a fraud investigation, not always litigation support, but on fraud investigation, there was a breach of the internal controls. So, with a lot of experience, old, I can go in and talk to somebody and they go, "Well, we do it this way, we do this, we don't have this, we have this." I go, "There's your problem right there," because I know where the breach is and where they
Right.
probably have a problem. Not 100%, but most of the time. Whereas accountants know controls, but they probably know it for their little process that they're focused on. Whereas internal audit is
Yeah.
much, much broader on the controls. And the other thing that has helped me is I've been teaching graduate level forensic accounting for 10 years. And that keeps me sharp on the new stuff that's coming out, the books, the controls, all of the different pieces of forensic accounting. So that was not something I ever planned to do. They go, "Hey, we've had a teacher that is ill. Would you teach?" And I said, "Well, okay, and we'll try. I'll do it in the fall." And I thought, okay, this is a one semester gig. And I'm at 10 years at University of Houston and 3 years at Baylor. And it is literally
Wow.
the hell out of my week. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Love it.
unless it's a
I
good
know. And then
time.
you try to, yeah. Well, and then you try to convince everybody else they should do the same.
They
That
should.
was
I
the first
talked to you
conversation I
about it.
had with
Yeah.
you in person.
There you go.
Oh, that's so funny. Hey, I have a bunch of students that listen to this podcast. That's my contribution
Okay. That works.
for right now. Yeah. Okay. So if you will, just tell all of us how you started your practice,
So,
Houston Financial Forensics.
okay. So I was at a firm. They decided to, and we kind of knew this was coming. They eliminated 3 practices all in 1 week. And
Oh
mine
gosh.
was one. So I had what my responsibilities was as partner there was to do all the forensic accounting, all of the M&A, internal control, internal audit kind of stuff. And they go, we are just, and CPA firms are a little notorious for this. And they're especially the middle size and the smaller ones. Those practices do not have an even flow of revenue. And so
Mhm.
I might have a $250,000 fraud investigation, and I may be sitting around for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and I can do it all by myself, or I need staff. Well, when I needed staff, it was in audit busy season, so I was stuck.
Always.
Always. I mean, the timing is always
Always.
horrible. And
Yep.
so the ups and downs on the 3 practices that they eliminated were giving them heartburn, and they can plan and cash flows and, the time like when I need staff is in January, when I didn't need staff was in August when we had time on our hands. And so
Mhm.
they said, "We'll eliminate all your non-compete, go." I was working on a couple of projects. I literally stayed in the office for about another 6 months and finished those for them. And then I'm like, okay, I've got to come up with a name. I didn't want like Dan Ramey Investigations or anything like that. So I go, Houston
Right.
Financial Forensics. I don't have to explain it to anybody. Okay. I mean,
There you
and
go.
that's a key.
Yep.
And I previously had been at a firm that we had to explain the name, and that was part of the conversation. And I didn't want to do that ever again. And so I said, okay, we're going to start. This is what we're going to do. And I'd always wanted to, at some point, get to that point where I could have my own firm. And like that was a little
Mhm.
push, but it was enough push that I made it work. And I was blessed to have some good projects right up front. So get it cash flowed, get all the equipment, subscriptions, and everything that I needed. So that it worked very, very well. And I can't promise it's always going to work. There's always ups and downs in this business, and you think, I don't have anything to do, and then you'll get 2 phone calls come in, and you're covered up. So
Yeah.
yep,
I've told my staff in the past, I would say, if it feels quote unquote slow, we finish everything we have, even if people aren't, pushing us for a deadline. We finish that. But then that's when we go and like, I don't know, go to a spa one day or whatever, because a couple weeks later we're gonna have a whole bunch of
it's
stuff to do.
coming. It's coming.
Like you
You're
need to just enjoy the rest and then it's gonna like, pile up again.
That's right.
Yeah. So we already kind of covered the types of cases that you're hired for, but where does your work come from? How do people find out about you and contact you?
So there's
And then yeah, what's that referral source, I guess?
so there's multiple ways. One is I was blessed at the firm that we had a relatively robust business development group, and they got us in front of lawyers and stuff. So I had several years of that. Um, I've just got a pretty broad network here in Houston, which is nice. I mean, we're obviously a big town. We've got tons of lawyers and friends from church and social and school and everything else. And so I know them and I continually reach out to them. I've got a couple lawyers that I have lunch or breakfast with frequently. Um, those continue to develop. Speaking to groups, I've had like controllers and CFOs and CEOs come up and go, "We need you for such and such, like a risk assessment," or they call in 6 months and go, "Hey, I saw you speak at this conference." I'm speaking at 2 conferences this summer. One is the IMA Global Conference. The other one is the ACFE Global Conference. Um,
Oh, that's
the
great.
the the one for IMA is going to be a like let's stop the fraud. I'm not going to give you the topic name, but because I'm still building it. But how do we
Okay.
stop fraud? So it's let's get it stopped. So we're going to talk about data analytics and internal controls and getting the fraud stopped before it happens because it's very, very disruptive to businesses. And the executives
Yes.
want to stay involved, and I'm very forceful about let me take care of this. You run the business, otherwise everything's going to collapse. So let me take care of this. I'll keep you informed. Um, then there's attorneys, there's bankers sometimes. But once you do a good job with an attorney, they will keep using you. The referral problem with attorneys, at least in my opinion, is the firms are very, very siloed. And so you could work for attorney A and sitting next to him is attorney B, and they have no idea about you. It's not like you get,
Yep.
the big law firm and you've got all of it. No, you've got that attorney, and maybe if they meet in the coffee bar or he sends out an email, I need a forensic expert on this, somebody goes, hey, call Dan. But when
Right.
you meet with one lawyer, you meet with one lawyer. You do not meet with a firm. And that is a challenge for us as a profession to get more business out of these firms. And, the call they make or the referral they make is the last person they talk to. If I'm
Yeah.
it, I get the work. If you were it, you get the work. And
Yep.
so it's a little bit of a challenge. I've got a few attorneys that I think I'm probably top of mind with. I hope I am. I think I am.
Mhm.
And so those
Mhm.
that work continues, or somebody will ask and they'll refer over. So it's there. There's not a mark, and I've had people say, "Hey, you ought to market in this directory or that directory," and I've never really seen the benefit of that because I'm not sure people are reading those, and that's not a hit on them. But like the attorneys are busy, they're billing, they're handling cases, and I'm just not sure they're looking at directories and magazines and all of that. So I think word of mouth, personality, and they hire people they like. I mean, they don't hire
Mhm.
XYZ firm, they hire Dan or they hire Leah because they like us and they think we do a good job. So
Um, yeah, I wanna get into more of the details of this, but let's take a quick break.
Did you know that the investigation game isn't just for professional continuing education? The Investigation Game Education Edition is for university teachers to provide their students with a hands-on experience to work with sample evidence, replicating an actual fraud investigation. The games will reinforce the steps to basing the investigation findings on data analysis and best evidence, not opinions. To order the Case of the Cash Flow Fiasco or the Case of the Man Cave for your students, visit workmanforensics.com/TIG-educators or check out the link in the show notes.
Welcome back to my conversation with Dan. So Dan, I want to get a little bit more into this, how do we approach selling to attorneys? Especially, I feel like just from some of the hires I've made in the past, people are so nervous. And I think in this accounting world, especially when we're dealing with accountants, they're thinking, oh, just give me the numbers. Like somebody else needs to make that sale. And I had to personally learn how to do this. And so I'm curious, how have you developed these relationships with attorneys? What does that look like? What is in your comfort zone of selling your services?
Okay, that's a great question. So my first response, and this is what I even tell all of my graduate students, everyone is in sales. So I
Yeah.
don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're a cost accountant or you're an auditor. You are selling yourself. You're selling what you do all the time. And so you just
Hmm.
kind of take that up a level. And you know, the worst thing that can happen, Leah, is you get a no.
Right.
Okay. And I don't know
Right.
anyone who's died from a no yet. We we
I
we
think
we
you're
might
right.
die a
Yeah.
little bit, but we're not dead, and you rise up and go again the next day. And so you propose on projects, you tell them what your experience is. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe they don't like it. People buy from people they like. And if they like me and we have a great conversation, I probably get the work. If for some reason they don't like me, I'm not gonna get the work anyway, and I probably don't wanna work with them, you know?
Right.
And so
Because it
sometimes
goes both ways.
yes, it does.
It goes
And
both ways.
I had real quick story, no names, but I had an attorney meet me for breakfast one day. He came in, he had a flash drive, and he said, "We're supposed to have breakfast," but he said, "I've gotta go do something." He said, "Here's the information you need from the client," because the client said, "Y'all have to work together." And he goes, "I don't like working with experts." He said, My job is to tear them up in court, so good luck." And gave me the flash drive and turned around and walked off. We made it, we
Oh my
survived,
God.
but, like, that's the way he thought of experts and forensic accountants. We got through it. Most of the work was for the client, not for the attorney. In the end, the attorney got cut by the client later, and they hired another law firm. No, not because of me, but just because of some other things that had happened.
Yes.
Um, but I think you have to sit down and have a meal. In Houston, and this may not work everywhere, if you buy someone a meal, lunch, breakfast, whatever, there is probably work coming. And in Houston, the business environment is great. It always has been about this.
Mhm.
That if I can get in front of you, then you will probably at least give me a shot at something. Maybe I get a little project and we do it well, and then they trust you and they bring you on a bigger project. But just having a personality and just talking to another person one on one, what are they doing? What kind of cases are they seeing? What are you looking for? You don't have to say, like, hey, let me tell you the 50 things I can do. They're going to get that through
Right.
the conversation. But what are you doing? What's going on? Stay in touch with them. LinkedIn is huge. That's another way that I get connections. But the speaking is huge because you're in front of so many people, multiple times a year if you do this. And I don't know, I heard this several years ago. If you stand up in front of a group and you're willing to talk, you're an expert. Because most people will not
That's a
stand
good
up
point.
in front of a group of, I've probably have had the largest group, I probably have had 500.
Mhm.
Every week I'm in front of 20 to 30 graduate students that are firing questions back and forth all the time. So you really like get very comfortable with being in front of people like that. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of blessed with a few great breaks to do, like the teaching and people asking me to speak and et cetera. So some of the speaking is virtual and some of it's live. So I prefer live.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, me too.
But just going
Es
in, just developing a relationship with them. Now, sometimes it's hard to get attorneys out of the office.
Mhm.
Now I have not done this because I haven't needed to, fortunately. But my thought is one of the best ways to market to them is to do a lunch and learn in the office. They don't have to leave, they just have to come down the hall. And if you can provide CLE, they will come. So if you've got lunch
Yes.
and CLE, they will come. Tell them who you are, tell them what you do, tell them a couple of the cases, finish their sandwich, get their CLE, and go right back to work. And I still
Yep.
think that is probably one of the maybe second best to having a one-on-one meal because you can get several attorneys that way. But
Mhm.
I have not had to use that yet. So that one's kind of in
I
my back.
I've had that kind of idea for a while myself, but you're right. Just I've never needed to use it,
Right.
and actually, you talking about this reminded me that several years ago, I was trying to teach someone how to do this, like how to meet attorneys, where are you gonna start from? And so what we did was my assistant went on the state court network for our area and looked for fraud cases
Okay.
that were out there, then found the attorneys who were representing the parties,
Okay.
and then we found contact information from them. And then we sent emails, very personal emails.
Okay.
We never said where we found their information. We never said, hey, we know you have this fraud case. But what that did was take this, because there's so many attorneys. I mean,
Right.
even in, Tulsa is much smaller than Houston, but there's all these attorneys. And I did this for Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And so then we just started sending these emails, and we'd send out like maybe 5 a week. And they were very personal. It was not a mass email, but just inviting them to go to lunch or breakfast, coffee, and meet up. And I think I had 2 attorneys respond out of the 5. We were going to do this every week.
Okay.
So I was trying to lead by example. So I would send out my 5 and encourage my staff member to do the same. And they ended up with at least 1 meeting, and I ended up with, I think, 2
Okay.
or 3.
Out of all of
And that resulted in speaking engagements. But, the worst thing that happened was that they just ghosted me,
right.
right? Like, they just didn't even respond to the email. I didn't even get a no.
Right.
But if I'm sending out so many emails a week to do this,
You're gonna get a hit.
someone's going to say yes.
And and
Right.
and to stay busy, we only need a couple of those to hit.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're a solo firm.
Yes.
I mean, I've got too many cases at the moment, but because that's going to be the struggle, is getting too many cases. But I mean, it turned into speaking engagements. It turned into coffee. It turned in, and just from, I sent 5 emails,
Mhm.
and I ended up with multiple cases and speaking
There you
engagements.
go.
And then when I'm there, I have pre-planned in my head. I just have some like notes, like I would for a presentation,
Right.
of things to ask that person about themselves. About themselves. So, how did you start this practice? What are your specialties? I mean, just asking someone those questions and having those teed up, but they're going to have a bunch of questions for me too. So, just to keep the conversation going, if I'm concerned about lulls or anything, I just have a list of questions. Just
Such a
plan
great
for the meeting a little bit.
and I never go into those with, like, brochures and anything else. I give them my business card, and then when
No.
we're through, I'm gonna go, "Do you mind when we get through if I send you" and it's just a PDF, brochure of what I do, and they're like, "No, go ahead and send it to me," because I want them to have that leave behind. Now, I don't know where it goes. It may go in delete, but that's okay.
Right.
But they could forward it to somebody else, or that it could be a reminder to them, et cetera, et cetera. So you do that, but I'm never hard sell about, "Let me tell you everything I do and how I do it and how, great I am and all of
Mhm.
my clients and da, da, da." That just doesn't happen. Because I really
Yep.
believe people buy from people they like versus not necessarily not skilled, but like, "I like you, I can work with you," versus, "Here's all the skill sets." So
There was an attorney that told me once, because when I started my business, I was 26, and this was my very first client.
so that was a year
And he
ago?
told me one yes, it was a year ago.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, he told me one time, actually, this story is so funny. I get a phone call like the night before. This attorney, I had done a little work and for him, or several cases for him, and he calls me and says, "Hey, Leah, I need somebody to come testify about receiverships. You've worked on a couple. You've been a receiver. Like, it's small town Oklahoma. Like, can you just come to my office at 7 a.m. We're going to drive over there.
Okay.
I'm like, okay. So I get in the car, but then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to like ride with this person for an hour and a half and like talk and then also come back. So I actually wrote out questions in my phone,
Okay.
like just in case, right? Because obviously, like this is a great time to get to know this person as well, even though we had worked together. But still an hour and a half.
That's a
I
long
mean,
time.
it's like a lot.
That's a very long lunch.
That's a lot.
Fortunately for
Plus we had
lunch,
to do that,
you got, you know, you're kind of within an hour time frame, so you can handle that conversation.
right. Yeah.
Hours in
It was
the
going to be 3 hours round trip. We're going to have to eat lunch, I mean, it was a lot.
Ooh,
So we did that. But as part of this conversation, first of all, it's probably one of the most valuable conversations I've ever had. But it, like I just learned so much. But also he said that the reason that he took a chance on hiring me on the first case was that he could tell that I was someone that didn't feel like I had to know all the answers, but that I was intelligent enough to ask questions and that I was looking to solve a problem instead of to just like prove that I was smart,
there you go.
essentially. And this was so early in my career. I mean, I was probably 27, 28 at the time. And I thought, I mean, that just like gave me so much confidence
Right.
that somebody would know this. But really, he just knew that from talking to me a couple times. That wasn't, I mean, no brochure could communicate that.
Well, because you weren't
It was just
you
having a
weren't
conversation.
pushy with them about, "Hey, here's why you need to hire me." Boom, boom, boom. You were asking legitimate questions. I have a I guess the police call it an intake form, but I have an intake form with about 30 questions on it that if someone calls, I
Mhm.
can walk through, and I should know all of those questions by memory, but sometimes I don't, or we get sidetracked. But I've got a list of, what's the accounting system and how did you find it and what's this person and what's their, bunch of questions so that I can kind of really analyze, is this a case I want to take and do they really have a problem? So no, I
Right.
think some general questions and asking questions is a lot more important than saying, "Hey, here's what I can do."
Right. Because they're going to know, they're going to feel comfortable with that. Yeah, exactly. So before we wrap up, I've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
One, um, what advice so you've worked in the public accounting or consulting firm space, but then you've also run your own business. So I'd like to know in if somebody was wanting to start a forensic accounting practice in the public accounting or consulting firm, what advice would you have for them?
So I think the first thing, Leah, is that you've got to have executive support, and I referred to it earlier that sales, revenue, whatever you want to call it, engagement, billings are up and down in this business, and you know CPA firms management normally, unless they're really committed to it, is uncomfortable with that going up and down. Now, if you look at Big Four and they've got like a whole litigation practice, that's another thing. And they've got enough to keep them busy and they realize there's ups and downs. Valuation is the same thing. But if you're in a smaller
Mhm.
middle market or smaller firm, you've got to realize there's going to be a lot of business development time that's not billable. And then you're going to be really, really crunched, just like you and I get. And you need help, and it's going to be at the wrong time of year. And so you really need to have a conversation with the management team and be honest and go, this isn't going to be like audit clients that they call me every year, or tax clients, because well, I've had obviously repeat business from lawyers. I don't think um, I've had one, though I've had repeat business from a client. Because you hope they don't have a major fraud every year. It's not like an
I
audit.
was just about to say that.
And so you've got to rely on other people, but it's not like, okay, once I get that audit, we're going to audit them for 10 years, I hope, if we provide good service and you've got steady revenue. Our revenue is only as good until we finish that last report and, maybe testify in court or whatever that you have to do for sentencing. So you've got to be sure they're on board. Have some extra skills. Like when I started the forensic practice, I had M&A, internal audit, and all of the forensics, and I developed the valuation expertise while I was there. So I had multiple things, and even with that, you're not always 100% busy because our job is
Right.
not in compliance; it's in litigation, and so compliance
Right.
means we're going to do it on and on and on. Litigation comes and goes, like I said earlier, you don't get the entire firm, you get lawyer A. Lawyer B doesn't even know about you. So it's I think the network is important. I think getting out in professional associations is important. And this doesn't happen in 6 months. I mean, you can put a business plan together, but it doesn't happen in 6 months. And
No.
that's the key, is that there's got to be some patience within the firm to be able to do that. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had to answer that question, because how do I get started in forensic accounting, or how do I start it in our firm, or whatever? And it is a challenge. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's easier when you're on your own. You don't have the overhead and you don't have all of the pressure, and everyone's not looking at the financials and the billings and all of that. And, if, as you mentioned earlier, if you need to go do spa day, you can go do spa day and it's okay. You can go
Right.
play golf, you can go to the range, you can do whatever you need to do sometimes, and not always worry about the billing. But then on the flip side, you may work till midnight 2 nights in a row or 3 nights in a row. Not that public
Right.
accounting doesn't either, but you've got that. So several of people that I kind of mentor have all got their own firms, and
Hmm.
some of them are like 1 or 2 people on the outside. And, as you and I and several other people network with each other, and if we get on overload, we can call the other and get some help, and, "What do you think about this?" and et cetera. So, I think you need a very strong network. You've gotta have, at least within the firms, you need to realize that it's not gonna be a smooth stream of revenue, which creates problems with payroll and everything else that's involved in that. So while it's normally high billing rates, higher than tax and audit, it's not consistent, and they've got to be
Right.
okay with that. And that's not every firm. They're just not comfortable with that ups and down on the revenue. So
Yeah.
that would be it.
And I
Their alternative is to start their own firm and network and connect to all of us that do this.
That's right. Yeah, when I started my firm, I had 3 months of no revenue. I had no network whenever I left public accounting. I was a staff member, and they were trying to start, like, teaching me how to do business development, but I left before I really met anybody. So, I had to figure out a way to fund my life for 3 months, which was kinda tricky.
Right.
Um, but I would also say that within a public accounting firm, just from the experience I have to build your external network, but also internally in the firm
Yes.
so that whenever they get a call, they say, "Oh, yes, we can help you with this, and Dan can help you or Leah can help you," you know?
And it
So that's kinda tricky. You
Right.
have to network both
And
places.
they have to have you kinda top of mind when stuff shows up. Like, I know one situation, I'm not gonna name the firm, but a very good client called them and said, "Hey, we've had a problem," and the tax person that took the call from the client said, "Yeah, I'll send out one of our accountants that can help you with the internal controls." And it was a major fraud. I mean, it was in the newspaper and people knew about it,
Oh my
but
gosh.
they didn't think through that to go, "That's an investigation." They go, "Yeah, we'll send somebody out." And it was gonna be like gratis, like, just go help them, like, figure out their controls and then come back to the office because 'cause
Oh
they're
my
such a
gosh.
good client. And, like, "Whoa, time out.
No.
This is called cross-selling, okay?"
Yeah.
And you're
Right.
right. It's getting other people on board. It's huge.
Yep. Yep.
I have been
Exactly.
blessed with good networks. When I left, I still had some work at the firm, and then I had 2 or 3 big engagements up front, like, all within that same time frame. So I was blessed with the right level of work, and that's not always the case, and so I'm thankful.
Mhm. Yeah, one other thought, this was not on our list of things to talk about, but if someone is kind of struggling to get a case, networking with people like us would be very beneficial
Mhm.
because it is very often that I could use an extra set of hands. And I'm
Sure.
sure you've had that as well.
But
And so just knowing that, oh, somebody would like some experience. Now I don't take volunteers, but I'm happy to put you on as a temporary employee so
Right.
that we can work a case together, that type of thing.
You can
But
you can do
um,
that. I've even had CPA firms call because they're conflicted out. or their team is too busy to, and sometimes they've got smaller ones. They want the big cases, and they've
Right.
referred, I'm happy with a small case. I mean,
Right.
I work it in with everything else I'm doing. And so
Hmm.
that's also another source is CPA firms that are conflicted or don't want to touch that stuff. I guess the
Yep.
worst thing is CPA firms that think they can and shouldn't ever touch a forensic case. Because I mean, you and I both know
Right.
there's lots of issues with these, and you've got to be careful, and you've got to understand where we could be sued or how to get to where you need to. I mean, interviewing suspects is not for everybody.
Right.
And
No.
just because you have a CPA or you work for a firm doesn't qualify you to do that. And you've got
Right.
to be prepared and ready to go and et cetera. So while you and I can do that, we would, I know, and you would too, mentor any of the younger generation that want to do this or people who want to start out on their
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, great. So, as with all of our episodes this season, we've asked our guests to provide a download for our listeners. So, will you tell us what your download is
own.
that you'll be providing?
So mine is I am a huge believer in data analytics can find and prevent a lot of fraud. And you don't have to
I
go
agree.
Tableau and Alteryx and
Mm-mm.
Python and R and all this stuff. You can do it in simple Excel, and Excel has gotten so powerful recently with what you can do, and literally just sometimes a sort of payroll or accounts payable
Yep.
will give you the answer. And if you look at some of the big frauds, I'm not talking like Enron level, but even as like Collins Street Bakery, $14 million. Take the checking, dump it, and look, do a sort, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of voids. Red flag, case over, done, fraud
Yep.
stopped. And it's not hard. And like I said, you don't have to have a degree in data science to make this work. You just need to dump out of whatever subsystem you're looking at and do a sort or a quick pivot table, something elementary, and fraud caught. So I'm going to give you a PDF that has a bunch of recommended data analytics tests that you can run, and all of it can be done in Excel and very simple. You can expand it to Tableau and everything else if you've got those skill sets in house. But if not, every shop has got Excel capabilities in it.
Right.
So that's
Yeah, that's awesome.
that's what I'm going to provide. I want people to use it and look for fraud and try to get it stopped before it becomes a big issue that you and I have to get into.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
Um, although if it happens, we can solve that
We,
problem
we
too.
will do it if
Right.
if they don't
Right.
if they don't run the data analytics, you and I can take care of it.
That's right. All right. Well, Dan, this was so much fun.
I've
Thanks so
enjoyed
much
it.
for joining me today.
I've enjoyed it, and thank you for asking me to be on the podcast.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Data Sleuth Podcast. The resources discussed in today's episode are available at datasleuthpodcast.com, also available in the show notes. If you have any questions you would like answered in the Q&A episode of this season, make sure to send them to podcast@workmanforensics.com or the Workman Forensics YouTube page or the Workman Forensics LinkedIn page. The Data Sleuth Podcast is a production of Workman Forensics. Thank you for listening.